The rain hadn't stopped since we buried him. 3 days of constant downpour like the sky itself was mourning Robert Walsh, the man who'd built an empire from a single food truck in Portland and never forgot where he came from. I stood at our kitchen window, watching water stream down the glass when I heard the key turn in the lock. My son Brandon didn't knock anymore. Hadn't in years, he just walked in like he owned the place. Which I suppose he thought he soon would. "Mom!" His voice cut through the silence like a blade. His wife Christy followed behind him, her designer heels clicking on our hardwood floors. The floors Robert had installed himself 30 years ago when we'd first bought this house. "Brandon," I didn't turn around. "I wasn't expecting you. We need to talk about Dad's assets." Christy said it before Brandon could. She always did. My son had married his ambition, and her name was Christy Chen, daughter of a real estate mogul who'd taught her that everything, including family, was just another transaction. "Your father's been gone 3 days. My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Which is exactly why we need to move quickly." Brandon pulled out his phone, already scrolling through something. "Dad's attorney keeps putting us off. We need access to the accounts. There are time-sensitive investments that require immediate. Your father just died." I turned to face them now, really face them. Brandon was 42 but looked older, stress lines carved deep around his mouth. When had he started looking so much like a stranger? "Can we at least get through the week?" Christy stepped forward, her expression what she probably thought was sympathetic. "Margaret, we understand you're grieving. That's exactly why you should let us handle the business side. You don't need that stress right now. Handle it," like I was incompetent. Like 50 years of marriage to a brilliant businessman had taught me nothing. "The will reading is Friday," I said quietly. "Robert's attorney will explain everything then." Brandon's jaw tightened. "Friday is 4 days away. Dad would want us to be proactive. He built a $50 million company. That kind of money doesn't just sit idle. 50 million. He'd calculated it to the penny, probably had a spreadsheet, probably had been updating it for years. "Your father's will, Mom." Brandon's voice took on that patronizing tone that made my stomach turn. "I know you think you understand business, but Dad and I had conversations you weren't part of. Plans. He wanted me to take over to grow the company. He told me so." That was a lie. I knew it was a lie because I'd been there for every conversation Robert had had about the business. Every single one. But Brandon had gotten good at rewriting history to suit his needs. "We're trying to help you," Christy added. "Think about Emma and Liam. Your grandchildren, don't you want what's best for them?" Emma and Liam. My grandchildren, who I saw maybe twice a year if Brandon and Christy decided Portland was convenient enough to visit between their trips to Dubai and Monaco. "Get out." The words came out quiet but firm. Brandon blinked. "What?" I said, "Get out of my house. The will reading is Friday at 10 a.m. at Mr. Morrison's office. You'll learn everything then." Christy's mask slipped. "This is absurd. Brandon is your only child. You're seriously going to make us wait because of some arbitrary— Get out." My voice cracked like thunder. Now, they left. Brandon's Mercedes roared to life in the driveway, tires squealing as he accelerated away. Only then did I let myself sink into Robert's chair, my hands shaking. That's when I remembered the envelope. What Robert's attorney had given me after the funeral came back to me like a lightning bolt. I'd been too numb to open it, too shattered to face one more thing. But now, alone in our kitchen with the echo of Brandon's greed still hanging in the air, I walked to my purse and pulled it out. My name was written across the front in Robert's distinctive handwriting. I broke the seal with trembling fingers and pulled out 4 pages covered in his neat script. "My dearest Margaret," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm guessing Brandon has already shown his true colors. I'm sorry I won't be there to hold your hand through what comes next, but I need you to trust me. What I've done with our estate will make sense on Friday. Brandon stopped being our son somewhere along the way. I don't know exactly when. Maybe it was gradual, law school, the big firm, Christie's influence. Or maybe it was always there, dormant, waiting for money to feed it. I've watched him calculate our worth. I've heard him on the phone with Christie's father planning strategies for after I'm gone. I've seen him treat you like an obstacle instead of his mother." My vision blurred. I blinked the tears back and kept reading. "Do you remember last Christmas, when he said he couldn't visit because of work commitments, but we saw his Instagram posts from Aspen? Or the time I was in the hospital with pneumonia and he called once in 2 weeks, and spent that call asking if I'd updated my insurance beneficiaries? That was when I knew. That was when I called Morrison and made the changes. Margaret, you're about to become a very wealthy woman. Everything, the business, the investments, the properties, all of it, is yours, every penny of that 50 million. Brandon gets something too. He gets exactly what his love was worth. The letter went on, explaining details, expressing love, giving me permission to finally stop making excuses for our son. When I finished reading it the third time, I realized I wasn't crying anymore. I felt something else, something cold and clear and resolute. Friday morning arrived with clear skies. I dressed carefully, navy blue dress, the pearl necklace Robert had given me for our 50th anniversary. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a 73-year-old woman who was done being dismissed. Morrison's office occupied the top floor of a downtown Portland high-rise. The view stretched across the Willamette River all the way to Mount Hood. Robert had loved this view. We'd stood here together just 6 months ago when he'd signed the final version of his will. Brandon and Christy were already in the waiting room when I arrived. Brandon wore an expensive suit and an expression caught between confidence and anxiety. Christy's designer outfit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Mom, Brandon stood up. Look, I'm sorry about the other day. I was stressed. We both were. But we're family and we need to support each other through this. Family. He always pulled out that word when he wanted something. Richard Morrison appeared in his doorway, tall and silver-haired, his expression neutral but his eyes kind. He'd been Robert's attorney and friend for 35 years. He knew exactly what was about to happen. Please come in. His office was all dark wood and leather, legal books lining the walls. We sat, Brandon and Christy on one side, me slightly apart from them. Already, without planning it, we'd arranged ourselves into opposing sides. Morrison pulled out a thick document. Before we begin the formal reading, I need to explain that Robert made significant changes to his will approximately 4 months ago. This is the final, legally binding version. Brandon leaned forward. What kind of changes? You'll understand in a moment. Morrison opened the document. To my beloved wife, Margaret Walsh, I leave the following: our family home and all its contents, the entirety of Walsh Foods Corporation and all associated business interests. My investment portfolio, currently valued at $47,800,000. All vehicles, properties, and personal effects not specifically designated elsewhere. The silence was absolute. I could hear Christy's sharp intake of breath, hear Brandon's chair creak as he gripped the armrests. That can't be right, Christy's voice came out strangled. What about Brandon? Morrison continued as if she hadn't spoken. To my grandchildren, Emma Rose Walsh and Liam Robert Walsh, I establish educational trust funds of $500,000 each. These trusts shall be managed independently and used solely for educational expenses. No funds shall be accessible by their parents or guardians for any purpose. Brandon's face was turning red. And that's it? That's all he left them? I'm not finished. Morrison turned a page. To my son, Brandon Michael Walsh, I leave the following items: one toolbox containing the original tools I used when I started Walsh Foods, a knife set, a spatula, and an apron. These are the tools that built everything when I worked 18-hour days so my family would never struggle. Additionally, I leave Brandon the sum of $5,000 to be paid immediately. $5,000? Brandon shot to his feet. Out of $50 million, he left me $5,000? Please sit down, Mr. Walsh, there's more. Morrison's voice remained calm. Your father wanted me to read the following statement in his own words. He picked up a separate page and began to read. Brandon, if you're hearing this, I'm dead. And if I know you, which I do, you've spent the days since my funeral calculating assets and planning expenditures. I hope I'm wrong. I hope you proved me wrong by showing up for your mother, by grieving like a son should grieve, by remembering that I was your father before I was a bank account. But I don't think you did. Morrison's voice never wavered as he continued. Let me remind you of some numbers: $85,000 your law school tuition that I paid in full, $60,000 your wedding that I funded, $35,000 the down payment on your first condo, $50,000 the loan you never repaid to start your investment fund. These aren't estimates. I kept receipts. I wanted to remember every sacrifice I made for you. Instead, I look back and see my biggest mistake. I gave you everything and somehow raised someone who thinks love is measured in dollars. Brandon's face had gone white. Christy stared at the floor. Yes, Brandon, I knew about your conversations with Christy's father. I knew about your estate planning discussions while I was still alive. I knew about the hospital visit where you asked your mother about updating beneficiaries while I was on morphine. I wasn't as out of it as you thought. I documented everything. Morrison paused. Your father goes on to say that any attempt to contest this will result in immediate public release of all documentation, recordings, text messages, emails, to every business contact you have, every client, every news outlet. This is insane, Brandon's voice cracked. He was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. Mom, you can't let this stand. We can fix this. I stood up slowly. Every eye in the room turned to me. For 53 years, I'd been the peacemaker. I'd made excuses when Brandon forgot birthdays, when he missed holidays, when he treated family like networking opportunities. I'd been the bridge between him and Robert, desperately trying to hold together something that had already broken. Not anymore. Your father, I said, my voice steady and cold, was the sharpest man I've ever known, right up until his last breath. He saw you exactly as you are, Brandon. And he gave you exactly what you earned. Mom, don't. The word came out like a whip crack. Don't call me that. I'm done being your mother in name only. You stopped being my son the day you asked about accessing accounts before your father was even buried. You get $5,000 and some old kitchen tools. That's more than you deserve. Brandon's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. I turned to Morrison. What do I need to sign? Just a few transfer documents. He slid papers across his desk. I read each one carefully. Robert had taught me that, and signed where indicated. Behind me, I could hear Christy whispering urgently to Brandon. Plotting, scheming. It didn't matter anymore. When the last signature was complete, Morrison pulled out a cashier's check for $5,000 and handed it to Brandon. Your inheritance, as specified by your father. Brandon stared at it. The check sat in Morrison's hand, worth nothing compared to what he'd expected, what he'd planned to spend, what he'd probably already promised to Christy's father's investment schemes. He didn't take it. Take it, I said, gathering my purse. It's yours legally. Your father made sure you'd get exactly what you deserved. I walked to the door. As I reached for the handle, I heard Christy's voice, high and desperate. Margaret, please, think about Emma and Liam. Think about family. I paused, turned back, looked at them both sitting there in their designer clothes with their empty hands and emptier hearts. I am thinking about Emma and Liam, I said. That's why their grandfather made sure you can't touch their money. That's why they'll get real educations, real opportunities. He protected them from you. You were the only family members they needed protection from. I walked out. The door clicked shut behind me with a sound of finality. The Portland air felt crisp on my face, clean, alive. I stood on the sidewalk and breathed deeply, like I'd been holding my breath for years, and finally remembered how to exhale. My phone buzzed, a text from Morrison. Robert would be proud. I smiled. Actually smiled for the first time since Robert died. I drove home slowly, taking the long route past the original Walsh Foods location, now a thriving restaurant with lines out the door. Past the park where Robert and I used to walk every Sunday. Past the community center he'd funded anonymously for 20 years. Our house looked different now. Not empty, just mine, completely, entirely mine. I made myself lunch, Robert's favorite turkey sandwich with his special mustard recipe. I ate at our kitchen table and thought about the future, about the scholarship fund I'd create in Robert's name, about Emma and Liam growing up knowing their grandfather loved them enough to protect them from their own parents' greed, about Brandon sitting in Morrison's office, staring at a $5,000 check and finally understanding what he'd lost. Not money, money was never what mattered. He'd lost something he could never calculate in his spreadsheets, never invest in his schemes, never regain no matter how many deals he closed. He'd lost love, real love, the kind that shows up in hospital rooms, the kind that remembers birthdays and calls just to talk, the kind that sacrifices without expecting returns, and he'd lost it because he'd never valued it in the first place. I finished my sandwich, washed the dishes, and went to Robert's study. I had work to do, foundations to research, scholarships to establish, a life to build with the gift Robert had given me. Not just money, freedom. Freedom from obligation that was never returned. Freedom from guilt that was never deserved. Freedom from hoping that maybe somehow Brandon would remember how to be human. Robert had freed me. And in doing so, he'd given me something more valuable than $50 million. He'd given me permission to finally, after 73 years, choose myself. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. The same sun that had risen on every day of my marriage. The same sun that would rise tomorrow on a different life, one where I was no longer trapped by maternal obligation to someone who'd forgotten what family really means. If you've ever sacrificed everything for someone who threw it back in your face, if you've ever been made to feel worthless by the very people who should cherish you most, remember this: your worth was never in their hands. It was always in yours. You just had to be brave enough to claim it. Drop a comment below telling us what you would have done in Margaret's position. Would you have fought for your son, or would you have honored your husband's wishes? Your story matters. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we share real stories about real people facing impossible choices and finding the courage to choose themselves. Watch the next video on your screen right now, another powerful story that'll make you rethink everything you know about family, loyalty, and what we really owe the people who take us for granted. See you there.